Welcome to Wisdom for the Present, where we take ancient truth and bring it into clear, modern understanding. This episode uses AI-generated narration based on human-researched and written material.
Right. And today, we're jumping into something pretty intense.
Yeah, we really are. So, I want you to imagine something for a second. Imagine knowing that you are about to die.
Like right in this moment?
Exactly. Not peacefully, in a hospital bed or anything, but standing completely alone outside the massive stone walls of your own city.
You're just totally locked out.
Right. You're locked out. And your family, your friends, your entire army, they are all watching you from the ramparts up above. And sprinting towards you across the dusty plains is a man who doesn't even look human anymore.
He's just this force of nature.
Yes, blazing in bronze armor, kicking up the earth, and he is coming to kill you. So that is the terrifying precipice where we begin this deep dive today.
It's an incredible scene.
It really is. We're pulling the core wisdom from the final chapters of Homer's Iliad today. And we want to extract the really profound psychological insights from this text. I mean, it's shaped human thought for thousands of years. But I really want to set the stage right away. We aren't just here to talk about Bronze Age battles or ancient spears.
No, not at all. Far from it, actually. I mean, we are looking at a literal masterclass in human psychology.
Yeah.
You're about to be guided through, honestly, one of the most intense emotional arcs ever recorded in literature, because we're stepping into an ancient society that's entirely driven by a strict warrior code.
Right, where honor is everything.
Exactly. Honor, glory, physical dominance, these are the absolute currencies of a person's worth back then. Yet, in these final chapters, this hyper-violent society is suddenly forced to confront the absolute limits of its own brutality.
It hits a wall.
It completely hits a wall. We're going to explore the terrifying anatomy of unchecked rage and the really irrational depths of human grief. And ultimately, we're going to see a radical, almost unthinkable restoration of shared humanity.
And I want to start right at that precipice I just mentioned, the edge of the abyss.
Right.
We really need to visualize the scene outside the towering walls of Troy.
The setup here is crucial.
It is, because the entire Trojan army has just suffered this devastating defeat on the battlefield. I mean, they have panicked, they've fled inside the city gates the author describes it as driven deer.
Just total chaos.
Total chaos. It's this sweaty, terrifying retreat. Everyone scrambles to safety behind those massive stone fortifications, except for one man.
Hector.
Right, Hector, the crown prince of Troy. Their greatest defender. He just stays outside, standing completely alone in front of the Scaran gate. And from across the plain, he sees Achilles coming for him.
And the imagery used here, it's so important for understanding the sheer psychological terror of the moment. Because Achilles isn't just described as a strong warrior, marching into battle.
Right.
He is described as blazing like a star. Specifically, the star we call Sirius, or Orion's dog.
Okay, so to a modern listener, a star sounds beautiful, right? Like a compliment.
Yeah, exactly. But we have to understand the historical context here. In the ancient world, that specific star rising in the late summer, that was a terrifying omen. I mean, the author actually notes that its burning breath taints the red air with fevers, plagues, and death.
Oh, wow. So it's not a good thing.
No, it was associated with the dog days of summer when the heat was oppressive, crops withered, illness just swept through cities. So by comparing Achilles to this star, the text is telling us that Achilles is no longer just a mortal man seeking a fight.
He's something else entirely.
He is a plague. I mean, he is a consuming fever coming to eradicate Hector.
That is terrifying.
Yeah.
And up on the ramparts of the wall, Hector's parents are watching this literal plague barrel toward their son.
Just completely helpless.
Right. His father, King Priam, is weeping hysterically, literally tearing his silver hair out by the roots, screaming down at Hector to just, step inside the gates.
Just take one step back.
Just one step.
Right.
And his mother, Queen Hecuba, is weeping too. She actually bares her breast to remind him that she nursed him, just pleading with him to have mercy on his parents and save himself.
But he doesn't move.
No, Hector's paralyzed. He's having this agonizing internal debate because the night before, he was given this really wise counsel by a commander named Polydamas to retreat the army behind the walls.
And he ignored it.
He completely ignored it. Hector, full of pride and overconfidence, he rejected that advice with disdain. And now, in the harsh light of day, he's looking at the catastrophic reality. His people were slaughtered on the plains entirely because of his own arrogant folly.
It's just a profound portrait of the human mind collapsing under the weight of its own errors. I mean, Hector is mentally scrambling for a way out here.
You can almost see the gears turning in his head.
Yeah, he actually contemplates laying down his heavy shield, taking off his helmet, and walking up to Achilles completely unarmed.
Which sounds crazy.
It does. He imagines offering to give back Helen, the woman whose presence started this entire 20-year war, along with all the treasure of Troy, just to negotiate peace.
But he realizes that won't work.
Right. Almost instantly, the cold reality of the situation just crushes that fantasy. He knows what state Achilles is in.
Yeah, Achilles is not there to talk.
Not at all. Achilles is so entirely consumed by rage over the death of his closest friend, Patroclus, that diplomacy is just impossible. I mean, if Hector approaches unarmed, Achilles isn't going to sit down to negotiate a treaty. He will simply slaughter Hector on the spot, as the text says, woman-like, without a fair fight.
Wow, so it's the ultimate psychological trap. He knows he made a catastrophic mistake, but he feels it's just too late to back down.
Exactly.
This perfectly mirrors the modern sunk cost fallacy.
Absolutely.
But elevated to a matter of life and death. You've invested so much into a terrible decision, right? Your pride, your resources, your public image, and even when you see the disaster coming, you feel you can't reverse course.
The psychological cost feels worse than the physical danger.
Exactly. The cost of admitting fault feels heavier than moving forward.
Right.
So Hector stays. He waits. But, wait, I'm genuinely struggling with what happens next.
Okay, what is it?
Well, when Achilles finally gets close, this great, noble hero Hector, the man who is trained for warfare his entire life, the ultimate defender of his civilization, he just loses his nerve. He turns and runs away.
He does. He just bolts.
How does a legendary hero do that? Is this supposed to be cowardice? Because that feels totally out of character for an epic poem about bravery.
It's a great question, but it isn't cowardice in the moral sense. It's actually a profound, terrifyingly accurate depiction of raw biology overriding ideology.
What do you mean by that?
Well, it is the primal brain completely hijacking the civilized mind. Hector has lived his entire life governed by his prefrontal cortex, right? The part of the brain responsible for complex planning, social behavior, and sticking to an honorable warrior code.
Sure, he's disciplined.
Very, but as this literal plague of a man bears down on him, the sheer existential terror triggers his amygdala.
The fight-or-flight response.
Exactly. The text attributes this to being struck by some god with unusual terrors, but modern psychology would recognize this instantly as an amygdala hijack. The fight-or-flight response takes over so completely that the social construct of honor just evaporates.
It's gone.
Completely gone. One man is urged by fury, and the other is driven by pure, unadulterated fear.
And what follows is this agonizing, almost surreal chase scene. They run 3 entire times around the massive perimeter of the walls of Troy.
It's exhausting just thinking about it.
It's right. Think about the physical exertion of sprinting for your life in heavy bronze armor under a blazing sun. But, the geographical details the author chooses to focus on during this chase, they're what really break your heart.
Yeah, the springs.
Yes, they run past the hot and cold springs of the river Scamander. And the text deliberately pauses the action to note that these springs flow into the marble cisterns where the Trojan women used to wash their beautiful garments in the days of peace.
That juxtaposition is devastating. You have this horrific, desperate race for survival flashing right past the ultimate symbols of domestic tranquility.
Like the washing cisterns.
Yeah, they represent a lost world of community, routine and creation. And now they are just blurry milestones in a frantic circle of death. The text is forcing the audience to look at what warfare actually destroys. It isn't just armies that die, it's the entire capacity for normal, beautiful human life.
And the pacing of the narrative is so cinematic here, because while this terrifying chase is happening in the dust of the earth, the author sort of pans the camera up to the sky.
Right, to the gods.
The gods are watching this play out almost like it's a spectator sport.
Yeah.
Zeus, or Jove, depending on your translation, pulls out a set of golden scales to weigh the ultimate destinies of the 2 men.
The scales of fate.
Yeah, he places Achilles' fate on one side and Hector's on the other. And Hector's side of the scales sinks down, heavy with death. His fate is sealed.
And the intervention of the gods here, it really represents the inescapable nature of mortality. Once the scales tip, the goddess Athena descends.
And she does something incredibly cruel here.
She does. She disguises herself as Hector's own beloved brother, Deiphobus. And she intercepts Hector during the chase and says, "Stand and fight, brother. I am here to help you."
Oh, that's just awful.
It is a cruel trick, but, it works. Hector's prefrontal cortex sort of comes back online just enough. He thinks he has backup, so he stops running, he turns, and he faces Achilles.
And he throws his spear.
Right, he throws his spear, but it just deflects off Achilles' divine shield. So Hector turns to his brother to ask for another spear, and he realizes
He's not there.
he is completely alone.
It's that sudden realization of absolute abandonment. I mean, Hector says, "Heaven wills it, and my hour is nigh." He realizes the gods have deceived him. But in that moment of absolute hopelessness, he actually makes a choice.
He does.
He decides to die great. He draws his sword and charges at Achilles, hoping to do some mighty deed for future ages to admire.
Yeah.
But Achilles is cold. He is calculating.
Well, and we have to remember Achilles is wearing the armor that Hector previously stripped off the body of Patroclus.
Oh, right. It's Achilles' own old armor.
Exactly. He knows every single inch of it. He knows exactly where the weak point is.
Just a small jointed gap between the neck and the collarbone.
Yep. And that is exactly where Achilles drives his spear.
The fatal blow. It strikes true, but it misses the windpipe, which allows Hector to speak his final words. As he's bleeding out in the dust, Hector makes one last desperate human plea.
He knows it's over.
He knows he's dying. He isn't asking for his life. He begs Achilles, by his own soul, by his parents, not to let the Greek dogs devour his body. He simply asks that his corpse be ransomed back to his mother and father for a proper, dignified burial.
And Achilles' response is, honestly, one of the most chilling, terrifying pieces of dialogue in all of literature.
It's just so brutal.
There is zero empathy. None. He looks down at this dying man and says, "No packs as lambs and rabid wolves combine." He tells him, "I wish I could eat your raw flesh."
Ugh, wow.
Yeah, he explicitly promises that the birds and dogs will mangle him, and that no amount of ransom, not even if Priam offered his weight in gold, would ever buy his body back.
Achilles isn't just killing an enemy combatant in this moment.
No, he is attempting to obliterate Hector's very humanity. He's trying to erase him from existence. And the desecration that follows is horrific. Achilles pierces Hector's ankles, threading leather thongs right through the bone and sinew.
Oh, man.
He ties the body to the back of his chariot, whips his horses into a wild frenzy, and just drags Hector's corpse through the dirt in full view of his parents.
In full agonizing view of his parents weeping on the wall, he kicks up massive clouds of dust, just dragging this ruined body. And eventually, Hector's wife, Andromache, she hears the wailing. She rushes to the wall, sees her husband's body being pulverized behind a chariot, and the text says the dark night of death settles over her eyes.
She faints.
She faints, feeling her entire world, her future, and her city completely end in that moment. Achilles is using the desecration of a body to inflict the absolute maximum psychological torture possible on the survivors.
Okay, so we have to pause here and bring this into our world. Obviously, the listeners tuning in today aren't physically dragging bodies behind chariots.
Right. Hopefully not.
Right. But this text is showing us the absolute corrosive, destructive nature of unprocessed grief and rage. Achilles falsely believes this toxic equation. He thinks that by inflicting maximum cruel pain on Hector's corpse, it will somehow magically cure the agonizing hollow pain he feels over losing his best friend.
Yeah, he thinks violence is the medicine.
Exactly. And if we translate this to the 21st century, think about how we drag the bodies of our rivals today.
It's a profound analogy, and unfortunately, we see this exact behavior constantly.
Where do you see it most?
Well, we see it in bitter, contested divorces, where one partner doesn't just want to separate, but actively tries to completely bankrupt, isolate, and destroy the reputation of the other.
Oh, yeah.
We see it in toxic corporate environments where a manager doesn't just fire an underperforming employee, but goes out of their way to sabotage that person's future career in the industry.
They want them ruined.
Right. And we see it most vividly on social media. The goal of a modern online argument is rarely to disagree or find truth.
No, it's to cancel them.
Exactly. The goal is to publicly humiliate, cancel, and digitally destroy their opponent. We drag their reputations through the mud, parading their failures in front of an audience, operating under the exact same false belief as Achilles, right?
That their destruction will bring us peace.
That their total destruction will bring us some kind of internal validation or closure.
But the tragedy is that it never, ever works. The allure of self-righteous vengeance is a complete trap.
Totally.
And why do we do it? Because we resist letting go of our anger. We feel that holding on to the rage honors our pain. If I stop punishing the person who hurt me, it feels like I'm saying what they did to me didn't matter. It feels like a betrayal of the wound I suffered.
That is so true. It feels like letting them get away with it.
Yes. So I want to pose a practical question for you, the listener, to genuinely reflect on right now. Think about your own life. Where are you currently dragging a body?
That's a tough question.
It is. What grudge, what deep resentment, or what bitter conflict are you holding on to under the false, toxic belief that utterly destroying someone else's reputation or happiness will eventually heal your own internal pain?
Let that sit for a moment, because the realization that vengeance does not heal, that is the hardest lesson a human being can learn.
It really is.
I mean, the battle ends. The Trojans are locked inside their walls in mourning. The Greeks have won the day. Achilles has taken his revenge. But when we look at him on the beach with his elite shock troops, the Myrmidons, he is not victorious.
He's exhausted.
He is still encroning. He's utterly exhausted. He falls asleep on the sand, and we see exactly how ineffective his violent outburst was. Because in his sleep, the ghost of Patroclus appears to him.
And the ghost comes at him looking exactly as Patroclus did in life. The same beautiful eyes, the same voice, the same clothes. And the ghost begs Achilles for proper burial.
He's stuck.
Right. He says he is wandering outside the gates of the underworld, unable to cross the river and find rest until his body is consumed by fire. And in this incredibly tragic, vulnerable moment, Achilles, this terrifying warlord, reaches out his arms to hug his best friend one last time.
He can't.
He grasps nothing but empty smoke. The ghost vanishes into the earth with a feeble bat-like cry. And Achilles wakes up with a start. He realizes that death is an absolute impenetrable barrier. No amount of revenge can bring his friend back across that line.
So he just spirals further.
Yes. Driven by this fresh wave of desperate grief, he throws himself into building a massive funeral pyre. And this is where we really have to confront what is arguably the darkest, most uncomfortable sequence in the entire epic.
Yeah, it requires a really steady gaze to look at what happens next. Achilles and his men chop down huge swaths of the forest to build this enormous towering structure of wood on the beach.
To burn the body.
Right. And to honor Patroclus, Achilles begins to pile sacrifices onto it. He slays sheep and oxen, wrapping Patroclus's body in the fat of the animals, which, was a standard ancient funerary rite.
Sure, that part is normal for them.
But then, the unchecked rage and the bottomless grief take a horrific, escalating turn.
Yeah.
He sacrifices 4 beautiful, powerful chariot horses. He cuts the throats of 2 of Patroclus's own domestic pet dogs, throwing them onto the wood.
Which is hard enough to read.
And then, as the text says, horrible to tell, he slaughters 12 Trojan captives.
12 human beings.
12 living, breathing human beings. He murders them and throws their bodies onto the pyre to burn alongside his friend. He then pours out honey and wine, praying to the winds, Zephyr the west wind and Boreas the north wind. And the messenger goddess Iris actually has to fetch the winds from their celestial banquet to blow the flames, creating a conflagration so massive it burns all night long.
Okay, we absolutely must pause here and look at this with deep, careful discernment.
Yes, definitely.
Because we are reading a text from antiquity, and we need to be crystal clear. We are absolutely not endorsing human sacrifice or this level of grotesque brutality.
No, of course not.
This is a terrifying practice limited to the author's ancient setting and a hyper-violent Bronze Age warrior culture where human life was horrifyingly cheap. We don't excuse it.
No, we don't.
But as guides trying to extract wisdom today, we have to ask, what is the enduring human truth buried under all this ashen horror? Why does the author include this terrifying detail?
Well, the author includes it to show us the sheer irrational desperation of grief. I mean, beneath the horrific alien actions lies a very recognizable modern human truth.
Which is what?
The incredible danger of an unchecked emotional collapse. Achilles has experienced a total destruction of meaning. His world makes no sense without his friend. So what does a powerful person do when they feel completely helpless?
They try to take control.
They try to exert control through excess. Achilles is trying to offer the most valuable things he can physically lay his hands on: immense wealth, prized animals, and human lives. He's desperately hoping that the sheer, overwhelming volume of his sacrifice will somehow match the volume of his internal pain.
Wow, so he's trying to balance the scale.
It's a tragic, false mathematics. He thinks if he just burns enough valuable things, the ledger of his grief will balance out.
It's the ultimate extreme of throwing money, or in this case, lives, at a broken heart. He's just piling bodies on a fire, but the gaping hole in his soul isn't getting filled. I mean, the sun comes up, the massive fire finally burns out, and they gather Patroclus's white bones from the ash to place in a golden vase.
But he's not fixed.
No. Achilles is still fundamentally broken. The violence failed. The extreme sacrifice failed. So I have to ask you, if the vengeance and the bloodshed did absolutely nothing to restore his humanity, what actually starts to bring him back from the brink?
It's such a brilliant pivot by the author. What begins to heal the fractured community and slowly regulate Achilles is not the killing, but what comes next.
The games.
The organized play of the funeral games. Achilles hosts a massive series of athletic competitions on the beach to honor the dead. We see chariot racing, boxing, wrestling, foot races, and spear throwing.
It seems like such a weird time for sport.
It shifts the entire energy, though. It moves the Greek camp from the lawless, chaotic slaughter of war back to structured, rule-bound civilization.
I love the funeral games. It sounds like a strange time for a track meet, like I said, but it is packed with insight about how human beings rebuild. Let's focus deeply on the chariot race, because the dynamics here are fascinating.
Oh, the chariot race is incredible.
Before the race even starts, the old, wise king of Pylos, Nestor, he pulls his son Antilochus aside. Antilochus is competing, but his chariot horses are known to be kind of slow and old compared to the other kings. So Nestor gives him a masterclass in strategy.
Right, he coaches him.
He tells his son, it is not strength, but art obtains the prize.
Yeah.
He uses these beautiful analogies. He explains that a woodcutter doesn't just hack wildly at a giant tree. He uses skill and angles. A pilot steers a heavy ship through a raging storm using art, not just brute force.
That's all about technique.
Exactly. He tells his son exactly how to hug the turning post, how to lean his body weight into the turn, and how to outsmart the faster horses by using his mind.
And the contrast here is incredibly intentional. We just spent chapters watching raw, unbridled passion and brute force fail spectacularly with Achilles' rage. Now, Nestor is introducing the antidote. Disciplined, strategic execution. Nestor is teaching his son that in the systems of civilized life, wisdom, strategy, and emotional control, they beat raw horsepower every single time. It is a profound lesson on leverage.
It's the exact conversation a great mentor would have with a modern leader today. Think about it. It's like pulling aside a young, ambitious, completely burned out executive and saying, listen, stop just working 80 hours a week relying on sheer brute strength and caffeine.
Stop hacking at the tree.
Right. You're just hacking at the tree. Stop forcing it. Start reading the room. Understand the psychology of your team. Look for the leverage points. Use art and skill, not just endless, exhausting force.
And then the race actually happens, and it is pure, chaotic drama.
It really is. The gods are interfering constantly. Apollo gets angry and literally knocks the whip out of one driver's hand.
Which is so unfair.
It is. And Athena retaliates by breaking another king's chariot yoke, causing a terrible, violent crash where the driver, Eumelus, smashes his face and elbows into the dirt. Yeah. But Antilochus, following his dad's advice to look for the strategic advantage, he sees a narrow ditch in the road ahead, where only one chariot can safely pass.
He sees his opening.
He ruthlessly whips his slow horses, accelerates, and forces the senior king Menelaus into the ditch, nearly causing a deadly high-speed pileup just to pass him.
It's a brilliant tactical move, but it has severe social consequences, which leads to a really crucial aftermath. The race ends. Antilochus comes in second, beating Menelaus. But Menelaus is absolutely furious.
He is livid.
Because he is a senior king, a man of immense status, and he was dangerously, disrespectfully cut off by a younger, reckless man. Menelaus stands up in front of the entire army and demands that Antilochus stand before the gods, touch his horses, and swear an oath that he didn't cheat.
The tension is huge.
The tension in the camp skyrockets. We have to remember this is the exact kind of perceived public disrespect and bruised ego that started the entire Trojan War in the first place. Violence is a hair's breadth away. But watch what Antilochus does. He doesn't double down. He doesn't argue his technical right of way.
No, he de-escalates.
He deliberately de-escalates.
He is a masterclass in conflict resolution. He completely deflates the tension. He looks at Menelaus and says, "Excuse me, my youth has erred. You are superior to me in years and sense. I know young people have headlong rage and weak counsel."
He just owns it.
He publicly apologizes, validates Menelaus' status, and immediately offers to hand the prize mare back to him. And what happens? The psychology of it is beautiful. Menelaus' heart completely melts.
Yes, stay mad.
No. The text compares his sudden joy and relief to the gentle dew falling on a field of springing grain. Moved entirely by the respect shown to him, Menelaus softens. He says, "You know what? I yield too. My pride isn't more important than our friendship and your youth." And Menelaus gives the horse back to the kid anyway.
It's a stunning moment of grace in a poem about war. And if we zoom out to the bigger picture, Look closely at how Achilles is behaving during all of this.
Well, this is the best part.
This is the exact same man who, just yesterday, was dragging a corpse through the dust and slaughtering human beings on a fire. Now, he is acting as a calm, gracious, generous host. When two other leaders, Ajax and Idomeneus, start getting into a vicious screaming match in the stands over who is winning the race, Achilles actually stands up and calmly mediates.
He tells them to calm down.
He tells them to stop, reminding them that they would harshly judge anyone else acting with such lack of dignity. He hands out an honorary prize to old Nestor, simply out of respect for his past glory, knowing the old man is too frail to compete anymore.
He's being so reasonable.
Very.
Yeah.
During the wrestling match, when Ajax and Ulysses are locked in a brutal, exhausting stalemate where neither can win, Achilles steps in, stops the contest, declares it a tie, and gives them both equal prizes to prevent them from injuring each other.
He is actively mediating.
Yeah.
He is restoring order and dignity to the camp. Translating this to today, we are looking at the absolute necessity of shared rituals to rebuild a fractured community. The games reestablish a framework of rules, fairness, and mutual respect. You know, when we go through severe trauma, or when a community or a family goes through a vicious, prolonged conflict, words alone often fail. You can't just talk your way out of that much adrenaline and anger.
Precisely. This dynamic connects directly to how modern psychological therapies often use structured activities, play, or community rituals to help individuals process severe PTSD and trauma.
Really? How so?
Well, when the human nervous system is locked in a state of hyperarousal and fight or flight, like Achilles was during his murderous rampage, the brain perceives threats everywhere. Engaging in a rule-bound, low-stakes competition or a shared communal task that helps signal to the brain, specifically the amygdala, that the environment is safe again.
Because there were rules.
There are boundaries, there are referees. No one is going to die if they lose a wrestling match. The social fabric, which was entirely shredded by war, betrayal, and unchecked rage, is being systematically rewoven right here on the beach through the mechanism of play.
That is deeply practical. So here's a how-to reflection for you to apply this week. Think of a current conflict you are navigating right now. Maybe it's a turf war with a coworker, a tense disagreement with a peer, or a stubborn argument with a family member.
We all have them.
We do. How can you apply what we'll call the Antilochus Pivot? What would happen if, instead of doubling down on your rightness, instead of aggressively demanding your prize or proving your point, you yielded a minor point?
What if you just gave a little ground?
Exactly. What if you actively gave a little ground just to preserve the relationship? You might find that just like Menelaus, the other person's defenses completely soften, their ego relaxes, and you both end up winning.
It's a powerful tool, but it requires dropping the ego. And dropping the ego is exactly what we are about to see in its most extreme, historically profound form as we move into the final act of this epic.
Because Achilles isn't totally fixed yet, is he?
No, because despite the communal healing power of the games, Achilles' personal underlying wound is still festering. The games distracted him, but they didn't cure him.
Right, because the timeline jumps forward. It has now been 12 days since Hector died. And what is Achilles doing? He is still waking up every single morning, harnessing his horses, tying Hector's battered body to his chariot, and dragging it wildly around the tomb of Patroclus.
He can't stop.
He is entirely stuck in a loop of grief. Now, the god Apollo has been miraculously intervening, wrapping Hector's body in a golden shield of protection so it doesn't rot or tear on the rocks. But Apollo has finally had enough.
He speaks up.
He stands up in the court of the gods and delivers a scathing indictment. He says, Achilles has lost his humanity. He's a lion, not a man. Pity and shame are not in his soul. Paul points out a brutal truth. Everyone on earth loses a loved one, a brother, a son. You weep, you mourn, but eventually you have to let it go.
It's part of being human.
The human heart is built to endure, but Achilles is defying the natural order by refusing to move on.
And so the supreme god, Zeus, decrees that this unnatural suspension of grief just must end. He initiates a divine intervention from both sides of the conflict.
Right, he sends messengers.
He sends Achilles' mother, the sea nymph Thetis, down to her son with a strict message. The gods are angry. You must accept a ransom and give the body back. Simultaneously, Zeus sends the messenger goddess Iris into the besieged city of Troy. She goes to King Priam and tells him he must do the unthinkable. He must go in person, alone, into the Greek camp to ransom his son's body.
And the preparation for this journey in the Palace of Troy is so intensely, painfully human. Priam's wife, Queen Hecuba, is terrified and utterly furious. She thinks her husband has lost his mind.
She thinks it's a suicide mission.
She believes he's marching straight into a suicidal slaughter. Her grief has hardened into pure acidic hatred. She says of Achilles, "Oh, in his dearest blood might I allay my rage and these barbarities repay. I wish I could eat his liver."
She wants revenge, too.
She wants the exact same brutal vengeance that Achilles wanted. Meanwhile, Priam himself is lashing out from the depths of his own despair. He yells at his surviving sons. He calls them inglorious, soft, a servile crew of gluttons, liars, and dancers.
He's just so cruel to them.
He brutally tells them he wishes they had all died on the battlefield instead of Hector. He is verbally tearing his family apart while aggressively forcing them to pack a wooden wagon with 12 beautiful carpets, massive talents of gold, and a priceless Thracian bull to buy back his son's corpse.
It is a raw, unvarnished portrait of a family totally fractured by grief. They're turning on each other because the pain is just too great to bear.
Yeah.
But despite his wife's pleading and his own despair, Priam obeys the divine command. He washes his hands, pours a libation of wine to Jove, a sacred offering of precious resources to bridge the gap between mortal and divine, and asks for a sign of safety.
And he gets one.
Jove responds by sending a massive, dark eagle soaring on the right side as a good omen. And so an old king and his elderly herald set out on a wooden wagon into the pitch black of night, heading toward an army of thousands of men who want to kill them.
It's so tense.
Along the way, the god Hermes, disguised as a beautiful young Greek soldier, intercepts them. Hermes acts as a supernatural guide. He leads Priam safely through the sprawling enemy lines, using his divine wand to cast a deep magical sleep over all the Greek guards, guiding the wagon right up to the massive wooden door of Achilles' own tent.
We have to stop and truly visualize the absolute madness of this plan.
It's insane.
Imagine this in a modern context. It is as if the head of state of a besieged nation walked completely unarmed in the dead of night, past thousands of soldiers, directly into the personal bedroom of the enemy general who was actively burning his country to the ground.
Yeah, the general who killed his son.
Think about the sheer, terrifying, heart-stopping vulnerability that requires. What kind of courage does it take to intentionally walk into the jaws of the monster who killed your son?
It takes a courage that completely abandons the illusion of control. Priam knows he cannot fight his way out. He cannot order his way out. He must rely entirely on the dormant humanity of his worst enemy. And this brings us to the emotional climax of the entire epic.
The tent scene.
Priam enters the massive tent unseen. Achilles is sitting there quietly, having just finished his dinner. Priam walks up, falls to his knees, wraps his arms around Achilles' knees, and begins to kiss his hands.
Wow.
The text describes it so powerfully, it demands to be quoted. Those direful hands, his kisses pressed, imbrued, even with the best, the dearest of his blood. The old king is weeping and kissing the exact hands that literally murdered his children.
I cannot read that scene without feeling the gravity of it. The shock in the room must have been suffocating. Achilles' guards are struck stupid with surprise. They stare in complete silence, and then Priam speaks.
And his speech is incredible.
And notice what he doesn't do. He doesn't come in with political posturing. He doesn't threaten Achilles with the wrath of the gods. He doesn't even talk about Hector's glory. He strips away every single layer of kingship, politics, and warfare, and he presents his raw, naked suffering.
Just man to man.
He says, "Think of your own father, Peleus. He is old, just like me. He's probably being harassed by his neighbors right now, but at least he wakes up every day with the hope of seeing his son return from Troy. I have no hope. I am the most wretched man who has ever walked the earth. I've been forced to kneel, groveling in the dirt, to embrace the ruin of my realm and kiss the hands reeking with my children's gore."
And that speech, that specific appeal to the shared experience of loving a father and losing a son, that is what finally breaks the iron spell of Achilles' rage.
It just snaps it.
It is the emotional breaking point we have been building toward for 24 books. Achilles looks at the old man and he gently pushes him back. And then the ultimate warrior, the killer of thousands, the man who is compared to a plague star, begins to weep.
They both weep.
They weep together in the tent. Achilles weeps aloud for his own aging father, whom he knows he will never see again, and he weeps for Patroclus. Priam grovels on the floor and weeps for Hector. The text says they both indulged the gush of woe, and the agonizing sound of their shared grief filled the enormous tent. They bore it as heroes, but they felt it as men.
Here is the core wisdom, the modern translation that hits so incredibly hard today. What we are witnessing is the ancient discovery of radical empathy.
Yes, radical empathy.
It is the sudden, jarring realization that the monster across the battle lines, the person you have completely demonized, the person who has caused you unimaginable pain and who you blame for all your suffering, is actually suffering from the exact same human fragility that you are.
It changes everything.
In our 21st century world, we have a deep entrenched psychological tendency to categorize the world into in-groups and out-groups. We dehumanize those we disagree with politically, socially, or personally. We strip them of their nuance and turn them into two-dimensional caricatures of pure evil.
We absolutely do. It is a defense mechanism.
Yeah.
And the primary obstacle to growth here is the sheer terrifying vulnerability required to bridge that gap.
It's so hard to do.
We resist stepping into the tent of our enemy, whether that is a literal conversation or a mental shift, because it feels like surrendering our safety. It feels like giving up our righteous narrative of victimhood. If I admit that my enemy is a grieving, flawed, deeply sad human being, it complicates my anger.
Right. It's easier to just be mad.
It is so much easier and so much more intoxicating to stay behind our ideological walls and throw spears than it is to kneel down, drop our defenses, and recognize the humanity of the person who hurt us.
So I have to ask you, listening to this right now, who is the Achilles in your life? Who is the person you have completely written off as a monster, a narcissist, or beyond redemption?
Think of someone specific.
What would it actually look like? Not to excuse their actions, not to pretend they didn't cause real harm, and not to put yourself in danger, but to truly recognize their underlying human suffering. What would shift in your own heart if you saw them not as a villain in your story, but as a person desperately grieving their own losses and fighting their own terrifying battles?
If you can manage to hold that perspective, you reach the philosophical peak of the text. Achilles raises Priam up by the hand. He looks at the old man's white hair and white beard with genuine pity, and he shares what I consider the most profound philosophical truth about the human condition in the entire epic.
The two urns.
He talks about the two urns of Zeus. He explains that by Jove's throne in heaven there are two massive urns, one filled with the source of evil and suffering, and one filled with good and blessing. Jove mixes the cups for mortal men. But crucially, Achilles explains that no human being ever gets only good.
Right. He uses his own father as the ultimate example. He says, look at my father, Peleus. He had everything. Wealth, power, the gods even gave him an immortal sea goddess for a wife.
He had it all.
He had a life of pure blessing. But his evil is that he has no royal race to succeed him. His only son, me, is doomed to die young in a foreign land, leaving him alone. And he says to Priam, you used to be the richest king in Asia. You had beautiful children in a peaceful city. But now your urn is mixed with war and blood surrounding your walls.
The urns are mixed for everyone.
Achilles is saying that suffering is the great universal equalizer. It levels all human hierarchies. Kings in palaces and peasants in the fields both drink from the bitter urn of sorrow.
And notice what this shared philosophical realization leads to. It leads to immediate, compassionate action. Achilles orders his servants to wash and anoint Hector's body, carefully placing it on the wagon so Priam won't see the ruin and panic.
He protects him from seeing it.
Then Achilles shares a meal with Priam. He roasts meat and they eat together. In the ancient world, breaking bread with someone isn't just a polite gesture. It is a massive, sacred symbol of restored humanity, trust, and mutual respect.
It's communion.
Achilles then insists that Priam sleep on soft carpets. He places the bed outside on the porch, showing incredible foresight, knowing that if any Greek generals walk in and see the king of Troy, they might kill him.
So he's actually protecting Priam now.
He is. And most importantly, Achilles takes the initiative to ask Priam how many days he needs to bury his son. Achilles grants a 12-day truce. He personally promises to hold back the entire Greek army, delaying the war so Troy can gather wood from the mountains and bury Hector with the dignity he deserves.
The war is literally paused for grief. Humanity overrides strategy. So in the middle of the night, Hermes wakes Priam up and they sneak out of the Greek camp, driving the wagon with Hector's body back across the plains.
Back to Troy.
As they arrive at the gates of Troy as the sun rises, the prophet Cassandra sees them first. She cries out, and the entire city rushes to the gates, wailing. And the author makes a brilliant intentional choice here. He gives the final words of the entire epic not to the kings, not to the warriors, but to the women of Troy.
It's so striking.
The book ends with 3 incredibly powerful eulogies led by the women over Hector's body. And these speeches vividly show us the true, multi-generational cost of war.
The author is showing us the collateral damage of violence. First is Andromache, Hector's wife. She holds his head in her hands. She doesn't just mourn her husband, she mourns the inevitable destruction of her future.
She knows what's coming.
She accurately predicts that without Hector's strength to protect them, the city will soon fall. She knows she will be driven away on a ship as a slave to toil for an inhuman Greek lord. And most heartbreakingly, she looks at their infant son, Astyanax, and predicts that a vengeful Greek will throw him headlong from the towering walls of Troy just because he is Hector's blood.
It's a chillingly accurate prophecy of how war completely destroys the innocent.
And then you have Hecuba, his mother. Amidst all her agonizing grief, she finds this strange, beautiful comfort that his body wasn't destroyed.
Because Apollo protected it.
She notes that despite being dragged behind a chariot for 12 days, his body looks fresh, fair, and perfectly preserved, as if the god Apollo had gently put him to sleep with a silver bow. She finds a sliver of peace in the restored dignity of her son's physical form.
And then the final lament. The very last major speech of the Iliad comes from Helen, the woman whose abduction or elopement, depending on the tradition, caused this entire horrific 20-year conflict.
Right, the cause of the war.
Her eulogy is deeply revealing about Hector's true character. She says that in her 20 years of living in Troy, while the rest of the family despised her, blamed her, and constantly cursed her as the authoress of their woe, Hector never once said a cruel word to her.
He was kind.
When others attacked her verbally, he actively defended her. He protected her with his gentle spirit and his mild words. She weeps over his body and says, "Sad Helen has no friend, now thou art gone."
That is just so powerful.
I just want to sit with Helen's eulogy for a second because the contrast is staggering. Think about this deeply. We are reading an epic poem that is universally famous for being about the greatest, most lethal warriors on earth.
Alpha males.
Men tearing each other apart with bronze spears for eternal glory, honor, and dominance. And yet, the ultimate final compliment paid to the greatest Trojan hero isn't about his kill count. It isn't about his tactical brilliance or his raw physical strength. The final legacy spoken over his body is simply, "You were kind to me when no one else was."
That is the enduring legacy of a human life. War and conflict have collateral damage that echoes through generations. The battles eventually end, the bronze armor rusts into dust, the empires fall. But the kindness shown to the outcast, the gentleness offered to the vulnerable when it was easiest to be cruel, that is what is spoken over the grave. That is what survives.
So here is a final reflection for you to take into your week, your work, and your relationships. When the battles of your life are finally over, when the career is finished, the arguments are settled, the boardroom fights are done, and the achievements are logged, what will be the collateral damage left behind?
What's your legacy?
Will people remember your victories, your flawless arguments, your brute strength, and how you defeated your rivals? Or will they remember how you treated the most vulnerable person in the room?
It is a profound shift in perspective. It invites us to move away from a life of glory won through destruction and toward a legacy built on compassion, restraint, and the recognition of our shared human fragility.
And I want to leave you to ponder one final provocative thought as we close. The Iliad is widely known across the globe as the greatest war story ever told. Yet its climax isn't a battlefield victory.
No, it's not.
It isn't a conquering hero planting a flag on a burning wall. The climax of this monumental epic is two bitter enemies, an old, broken man and a young, exhausted warrior sitting in the dark, crying together over the tragic, beautiful fragility of being human. What if our greatest moments of strength aren't found in conquering our enemies, but in conquering our own hardened hearts?
That's the heart of this section. This is Wisdom for the Present, where understanding links to clarity, and clarity shapes how we see and live. We'll see you in the next episode.